I'm Martin Willis, and today I'm going to be talking about mainly looking at black African troops from Nigerian regiments, and I've got one example from Gold Coast, and really looking at what we can tell from the records about the individual soldiers, where they come from, and some of their experiences. So same picture as Dan, but so these guys are from Nigerian regiment. Quite possibly after the East Africa campaign, but this is the kind of troops that we're talking about. So I'm starting off with the actual war diaries, and what you find in two of the actual war diaries, there are nominal rolls for all the West Africa Frontier Force regiments. Not by no means complete, but they're a good starting point if you're actually interested in researching individual soldiers. You can't probably see that highlighted that well. But Adebite Offer is not the one I'm going to be talking about, but as I go forward, you'll actually see why I've highlighted that. But one of the key factors was the surname. They weren't actually allowed to use their own surnames. So we find that they're actually their towns or tribal areas that are used. So you don't or can't always actually identify which soldier's which when you actually find a specific record. So this is a map that isn't in our collection, but a bit more modern day, but gives you a kind of an idea of the layout of Nigeria. So if you do find somebody, you can actually track them back to the area that they're from. Like Offa, Adebite is just up from Lagos, so you can tie back into an area. One thing you will notice, this got the modern day boundaries, which are mapped from our collection, which is from 1910. Has kind of pre-war boundaries, which obviously land disputes and boundaries are still really kind of important today or contentious. But why I actually like this map as well, I don't know how well that comes out, but there's actually green writing, which is actually the tribal makeup of those specific areas as well. So when you are actually researching, you can get down into an area and you can get back down to some of the basics of their tribes, or the kind of their heritage as such. And so Nigeria in the First World War, look, I can never pronounce his name, so I'm not going to try again today. Thank you. And he actually kind of quotes that one of the most unfortunate elements in the history of the West Africa Frontier Force, as far as the African servicemen were concerned, was they weren't allowed to bear their proper last names. So those who distinguish themselves, and actually when we go slightly forward, some that haven't distinguished themselves, you can't really pull them out. And so again, you've got the different surnames that tie back to the areas. And that's the same for all four regiments. So Gold Coast, you see use of towns and tribal surnames. So Labari Dagati, from the Dagati people, based from Burkina Faso, Ghana. And you go through to Sierra Leone, Bundu Kissi, from the Kissi people. So you can actually get back through the names into their heritage, but not possibly actually be able to identify that specific soldier out of a number. And the first person I'm going to be looking at was Adebite Offa, 6310, which is the bottom right-hand side. But the top one is actually the person who was highlighted in the nominal roll. He deserted. Adebite Offa got the Distinguished Conduct Medal, African DCM. So in some essences, that kind of sums it up. But I found 7 Adebite Offas so far in the records, but you wouldn't be able to tell which one actually deserted and which one had the actual medal for bravery. They do note quite often on the medal cards when they entered the theatre of war. So the Adebite Offa we're looking at was right at the beginning of the war. So that's 9th for the 8th? 9th for the 8th, 14. But you will notice on the others as well, they're actually listed as deserted or killed in action. So you do get some of some of what's happened to them. And that was the other thing with the nominal rolls. They quite often have listed if they're wounded or if they were killed, which helps. So this record that we're looking at here was written by General Dobell at the end of the campaign. So it was a summary of the Cameroon campaign. On the left, you have the London Gazette, which is a published version. And with that, you only see Adebite Offa and his number. The record on the right is actually the draft from within the actual record. And with that, you've actually got what they actually did and things like the date, and other information like that, which is useful when you're actually moving on to looking at trying to find things like the events in war diaries. But obviously, if they didn't survive, all you'd actually see is a list of names published in the London Gazette. So it's helpful that they kept those. That's the actual war diary for what happened on for the 3rd Nigerians. They were attacked by 250 Germans. A number of times through a day, it's like 11:30 to 5:30. They had to keep moving camps to get away from them. And at some point, he's mentioned for conspicuous bravery. So we can get into a bit of understanding of what was going on and what actions led to him being awarded the medal. And again, he's listed in the which is WO 10225, which is the West Africa Frontier Force and King's Africa Rifles Distinguished Good Conduct Medal Register. So anybody who got DCM or was actually put forward for good conduct quite often will be mentioned there. So in some ways, you've got a good intersection of records where if you hit one, you can sometimes work across to actually build a bit about the actual individual you're looking at. And what I didn't mention, this is the 3rd page from that diary. First off, if you actually look for the 3rd Nigerian Regiment's war diary, where you think it would be at unit level, you won't find it. It stops. But going up through the echelons, there's 3 different levels. And I found this in one of the local HQs. And the actual chunk that was relating to that time was actually in that war diary. So sometimes if you are looking and you can't find something in a war diary, it's worth checking up through the chain of command as such. And luckily, this survived there. But why I separated this out is it actually lists that their final move was a 1/4 mile southwest from a town that the enemy had burned and looted 8 days prior, and food was sparse. So we know that they were struggling for food. The enemy tactics was burning and looting. It also mentions about the carriers weren't very trustworthy at this time, and this is only a few months into the war. But I think the real point is when we actually go to, I don't know how visible that is, actually look at kind of displacement of native peoples, the locals. I'll actually read it if I can. I did write it down actually, but a large displacement of the native population in various directions was a disturbing factor during the operation. Thousands of starving refugees flying from the Germans had to be removed by sea, rail and road and fed. Ida and Douala and many other areas contained many thousands of natives unable or frightened to return to their homes. Thousands again had been removed by the Germans from the country we occupied to act as carriers and labourers. So we kind of see the effect of the war on the actual local population and how they're being displaced. And actually, while they're actually trying to fight, they're having to deal with thousands of people on the move and feed them. And the final part was at the end of the campaign, where they said the readjustment of this large displacement now taking place owing to the conclusion of hostilities requires constant attention and the use of ships and also supplies in the, I can't read my handwriting right, of large bodies of natives who are starving, exhausted by long march home. So we kind of really do get that effect of the effect on the authorities and the fighting apparatus, but also on the actual population. So now I move on to a really cheery subject, which is the suspected suicide of Ojo Ibadan. Thank you. Yeah, in October 1916. So again, this is a court of inquiry, and as such, it lists the events and also who gave evidence. And as such, again, might not be able to read that, but in essence, they were moving down the Niger River, heading towards Lagos. They were supposed to be volunteering to go over to East Africa, and I'll read out the witness statements from the two African soldiers that are listed. So, Sergeant Major Aloha Ibadan, travelling on the Raven down the Niger River, about 2:10, Private Ojo Ibadan jumped into the water, and then Private Ngonde, I was laying on my mat next to Private Ibadan when he sprung up and jumped into the river. So it's good that we actually get the voice of the African soldiers. The rest of the evidence is all from actual European officers. But their actual conclusion was that he actually or deliberately jumped into the river and committed suicide by drowning. The three other soldiers listed there actually jumped into the water to try and save him. Lucky enough they survived. And it was quite heavily pointed out that it was crocodile-infested waters, and it was a really brave thing that they had done. And they were recommended for award to the Humane Society. But it's quite interesting when we see the reverse of the Commandant's opinion, and he saw little justification for the conclusion that he had committed suicide, and says he may have been dreaming, which isn't very flattering in either sense. But in some ways we don't know why or how. I mean, the actual finding was that he committed suicide. And again, I don't know if you can see that or not, but this is the extract for the 4th Nigerian Regiment at the time from their war diary. So even though they weren't actually at conflict at the time, they were a reserve force at that point. And it kind of sums up some of the reason why it could have happened or their feelings. But so there was much discontent in the 4th Nigerian Regiment owing to unsatisfactory settlement after the operations in the Cameroons and the lack of leave to visit their own countries during the 4 months immediately following the campaign. Also, the Gold Coast rates of pay introduced to overseas contingents of the Nigerian Regiment meant that there was no pay increase. Re-engaged men also received no gratuity, so there was no incentive to volunteer for East Africa. And then the very, very bottom part goes on to talk about many desertions took place from certain companies, and there was a few from the company that Ojo was serving with. So it kind of gives us an insight into, then their kind of mindset, the kind of way they've been treated, weren't able to go home, they weren't getting the kind of conditions, pay. He may have been dreaming, he may have been upset, we don't know. But I mean, we don't find many cases of suicide recorded, so it's kind of a hidden element, I suppose. And this is my final study. I take it we're all right for time. Which is a Gold Coast example, and that's for Timbila Bunsanga. Thank you. Got a dry mouth. And this is the actual DCM register again. So he's where the arrow is pointing to his entry there. We also find him in a nominal role. So we know that he entered theatre in September 14, and who he was serving with. Again, he was because he was awarded the DCM, and basically the commanding officer and number 2, the Europeans, were killed or injured, and he took over and took the position, forced the Germans back, and their machine guns had only set up about 30 yards away from them. He cleared some problems with the actual weapon. But he also actually then retreated back, taking the officers with him and all the kit as well under fire for that. So he was recommended for the African DCM. The war diary for this one's basically on tracing paper, so you can't really read it. It doesn't mention him by name, where some of them do. But it does mention what happened and the officers were injured. So it only focuses on the European elements. But I mean, the good thing about some of this stuff being recorded elsewhere is when you can't read things very well, you actually do sometimes have other sources to rely on. And this is actually in the back of the war diary, and it's a kind of a bit of a summary from the Gold Coast Regiment. And there it actually kind of records what he did and why he was recommended. And the final element to it really is we have 3 pension records that relate to West Africa Frontier Force. One's mainly Europeans, the other 2 concentrate on Nigerian Regiment and Gold Coast. And so he's listed in there. So we actually can tell about the disability side, rates of pension pay, and also what that meant yearly. This was actually these files were actually created because they thought they'd been overpaying them. So this was actually kind of an investigation into how much they've been paid pension-wise. So we know he actually got paid $712 a year. This file was about 1923, even though it actually covers, or the actual document date is 1917 to 1930. So we can, in some essences, follow him through, and you kind of see the outcome of that he is getting some remittance years afterwards for his service. I don't know if £7 was a lot in 1923, but and that's where I stopped because I thought that would take 15 minutes, but hopefully.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much.